In order to get a good handle on animating in 3ds Max, you'll definitely want to make sure to have a solid understanding of what interface button or icon does what. This video will help in building that foundation. Animating in Max all starts with the numbered ruler that you see running across the bottom of the interface. It's formally called the timeline, sometimes also referred to as the trackbar. The numbers that you see along the timeline represent the frames within your animation, with each 30 frames being used to measure 1 second in time. So 60 frames translates to 2 seconds, 90 frames to 3, and so on and so forth. To move in time, you simply grab the time slider that's located directly above the timeline. Pushing it to the right takes you forward in time, while moving it back to the left takes you back in time. They many times call that moving back and forth as scrubbing the timeline. Notice that the time slider has 2 numbers on it separated by a slash mark. The front number tells you the current frame that you're on, while the back number indicates the total number of frames in your animation. That total, spreading from left to right on the timeline, is also known as the active time segment. To move to a different frame, you have a couple of different ways you can go. Using the mouse, clicking above the timeline with the slider then moving to that particular frame location, or by typing your to be moved to frame number in over off to the right hand side of the timeline. So if I wanted to move for an example to frame 77, I could highlight the frame field number, type in the value, then press enter. The time slider automatically jumps to that frame and I'm ready to go. Directly above the type in frame field, you'll find your playback controls that allow you to move over and through your timeline. The single right-facing arrow is your playback. Clicking on the icon starts your animation play. Clicking on it again will stop it. There's also a keyboard shortcut you can use for that, the /. Just to both sides of the playback control, you have options for moving 1 frame forward and 1 frame back. For your shortcut keys, hit the period to go 1 frame forward, tap the comma to go 1 frame back. You'll also notice that your time slider has arrows on both ends. These buttons do pretty much the same thing, going forward or backwards 1 frame at a time. Back in the playback controls on the right, you also have commands to take you back to the front and end of your animation. In other words, the beginning and start of your timeline. Keyboard commands for these, the home key will take you to the front of your timeline, while the end key will take you to the back. Changing the length of an animation is done using the time configuration icon. You'll find it directly to the right of the frame field. Heading about halfway down in the dialog to the animation category, you can set both your start and end times. If wanting to change the length of your animation, you can enter your total in either the end time or the length. You also have controls for changing your frame rate up in the top left corner, including being able to use a custom frame rate should that be needed. In the time display category, you can determine what method of measurement the time slider displays. A little further down, you can adjust both your playback speeds and what specific viewports display the playback. Also an option that gives you the ability to rescale your time. So quite a bit of control as far as how you make your adjustments. As a side note, the time configuration controls can also be accessed by simply right-clicking on any of the playback buttons. Down on the timeline, you can also interactively add frames to the front of your animation using the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-Alt left mouse button. Or adding additional frames to the end using instead the Ctrl-Alt right mouse button combo. When it comes to creating keyframes, you've got a couple different options, using either the Auto Key or Set Key buttons below the timeline. With either keyframing command activated, you'll see a red band above the timeline and the active viewport surrounded by a red border. Both keyframing controls also have their respective shortcuts, N for Auto Key and the apostrophe for Set Key. So that'll give you what you need to know in using 3ds Max's animation controls. They'll all be pretty much part of everyday life when animating, so practice them up, know which one does what, and get to using those associated keyboard shortcuts whenever possible. They'll save both time and effort as you try to work as efficiently as possible through your projects.